Today we're going to be talking about communication and conflict in succession. So we're going to get right to the main tasks, or at least some of the tasks that stumble us, right? Some of our obstacles. So I'm going to get you started today. I am an economist and financial coach from Mississippi State University Extension. I'm housed in the Department of Agricultural Economics. And I'm very excited to get to be part of this team. And so I'm going to, like I said, get us started, and then we'll hand the ball off. So let's do that. Some introductory things. So the partnering with the Southern Rural Development Center, the North Central Regional Development Center, and then the co-authors and presenters we will meet here in just a little bit from NC State as well as Purdue. We're going to, so let's read this slide. So our purpose of this curriculum and this training, succession planning encompasses many emotional and financial aspects of a family and a business. So making decisions and moving forward, that can be difficult. And that's what the research shows us. And so this curriculum was developed based upon the hurdles and the obstacles that we continue to hear about. So this research-based curriculum with comprehensive handouts that are integrated will give participants the confidence they need to learn strategies for moving the succession process forward with their property or business. So we're going to cover soft and hard skills in the materials with the goal to empower owners to develop and implement their succession plan. So we're happy that you're with us, whether you are an extension professional, extension educator, community educator, grassroots organization, if you are a landowner, business owner. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we mean by all of those. Again, you're going to meet the other authors. We are also the presenters today. So we'll keep going. And okay, some disclaimers. So the materials are intended to present general information on succession planning. Might not be applicable to every state or territory, as different states have different laws when it comes to this, even down to the county level sometimes. So these materials do not provide legal advice. So obviously specific advice should be obtained from an attorney or other professional. We're going to talk about the team that you're going to need. Well-versed in facts and the circumstances related to the advice that's being sought and where the property is located. What we really want to do with this is to help you get prepared to go into the lawyer's office or your other team that's going to be supporting you. So you will be able to be more efficient in that process. You will be able to go through that process more smoothly. So just again, a little disclaimer. So what we're asking is for no personal stories. We do want the training and our time together to be relevant to you, but we need to avoid very specific situations where like actually seeking the advice of a lawyer is the thing that was needed. We want you to definitely want you to ask questions and be engaged, and be with us, but be cautionary if we're getting into too specific of a situation. And if we do get there, we will just point it out, and we will do the best we can to kind of make it a general situation. So if we do have personal questions, go ahead and reach out to us outside, and we'll do our best. And we will refer as well. So we will model the skill of referring. Okay, so just we're going to spend a little bit of time today to see who we've got on the call. So we're calling this a warm up and introduction, but our little icebreaker. And we're going to encourage people to keep paying attention. It's afternoon, and so we could be like, we want to keep the energy up. So would you take a second and just put in the chat? We have any options here as that you could choose if you were doing this presentation with a group. But I'm wondering today, go ahead and tell us where you're from. Say hello in the chat. Tell us your name. And would you please share what favorite food you're most interested or you're most looking forward to coming up for the holidays? So in the chat, if you could please say hello and let us know what foods you are most excited. Hey, Lalo. Great, thank you. Sweet potatoes. Thank you, Sarah. Hot cider, awesome. Spaghetti. Oh, interesting. Different traditions. Awesome. Mac and cheese. Dressing and gravy. Good. Ready for turkey. Oh, cornbread. Ooh. I don't know how to say that, Lalo. Bacalao?
Bacalao.
Seafood? Bacalao. Okay. Seafood mac and cheese. Well, what is it, Lalo? Tell us about it.
It's
Any kind of
actually
pie. I'm with Elaine.
it's a dry cod, salt dried cod.
Okay, so it's a kind of a fish.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Sweet potatoes with bourbon. Awesome. Good. Friends. Nice. I love it. Grandma's mashed potatoes. Okay. Really. Apples, it's a great time of year. Anything with cranberries, Ardell, I'm with cranberries. I do a cranberry sauce once a year that I really love. Ooh, Linda, grilled steak. Okay, nice. Great. Homemade yeast rolls. All right. Good deal. We're getting excited for the holidays. So thank you all for doing that. In the curriculum, we envision, being at a table, and you can do this however you want to. Today we've got an awful lot of people, so we thought we would just keep things rolling and skip the breakout session. But you've got options as you start to get, your crowd warmed up. So excellent. Okay, so just a few terms so that we are doing our best to have common language. So when we say succession planning, we're going to be specifically talking about the plan to transfer of the plan for transfer of management or ownership during the life of the owners. So very much focused on the business and what is going to be happening to the business while those owners are still alive. Where estate planning is going, we're going to be, we think about that as the broader, bigger plan for transfer of personal assets and property that transitions after the owner passes. We understand that in some states and in some places, estate planning, people think or use the term succession, but we're going to be breaking them down this way. So when we're talking about succession, we're really talking about what happens to the business. And then the estate planning is an additional bigger piece, and that's after the passing. Also, we're going to use the term successor. If we were all in a room, I might have us say it. Just comes out of the mouth a little funny. And incumbent, which is also kind of like a big term. So successor, if you're at your desk, go ahead and practice that. The junior generation. So that's the generation that will that the ownership will go to. So the junior generation or the next individuals who will manage or own. And an incumbent is the senior generation or the current owner or the current manager of the business. And we're going to use the term businesses, and we're going to use that to be very broad. So very broadly. So that could be entities that could be designated many different ways, whether it's LLC or sole proprietorship, land in a trust, a corporation, company, partnership. These are going to be businesses. And we're going to use the land also very broadly. So any type of land, not limited to forests, for bare land, vacant land, farmland, pasture, land with buildings, barns. So all of that property. And so this is where we're going to do today. So Renee is going to lead us to through why are we fighting? And then we're going to move to the commitment to the process, and so the incumbent and successor. There are vocabulary terms popping up already. And then different conflict models, how to use them, going through an example, and then resolution in succession. So with that, Renee, are you ready to drive?
I'm ready to drive. Thanks, Becky.
Awesome.
Thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm really excited. We're going to kick it right off with why are we fighting? So we know there's a ton of conflict in succession. I'm going to go back because I don't want you to see all this yet. But in the chat, can you put maybe why you think there's so much conflict in succession? Why do we fight when it comes to succession? Drop some ideas in the chat for me. Greed, sibling rivalry, yeah, envy, family history, control, fear, money, assets, fair isn't equal, different goals, fear of what might happen, yep, different perspectives, poor communication, difference of opinion. Wow, you guys are on it. That's awesome. So we're going to go through some of these. And before we really dive into conflict, I just want to make it clear that when we say conflict, my mind obviously automatically goes to negative, right? It has this negative connotation. I think, oh my gosh, conflict is bad. Conflict is bad. But really, one thing that we need to understand is that conflict really isn't good or bad. It's just a part of life. I don't think you'll meet anybody who says they've never had a conflict, and you've probably not met anybody who could say, I haven't grown because of some sort of conflict. I know that I definitely have. But we really need to try to make the most out of each situation and use it as a learning opportunity and life lessons. So we're going to go through some of the reasons why there's so much conflict in succession. A lot of these were listed in the chat, so you guys are all on it. But family legacy, we have a lot of emotional ties to what's going on with our land, with our assets. When we think about, our parents, our grandparents who had the land or the business before us, it can be really hard to think about moving that on to the next generation. A lot of times there's a large amount of assets. When we're talking about land values, they've just gone up and up and up and up. So as time goes on, these properties that families have, these farms, these forests, they become more and more valuable. So a lot of times you probably heard more money, more problems. That's definitely the case here. If you do have a business entity, mixing that business and family, that can be really hard and that can cause some tensions. We talked about incumbents and successors, as Becky mentioned those terms at the beginning. We also have a sandwich generation that's in between. So a lot of times in these families, we have 2, 3, 4 generations, and communicating across generations can be very different. I know that my kids, they're 8 or 7 and 10. Some of the things that they say, I say, huh? What does that even mean? Right? It can be hard to communicate across generations. I think this one was mentioned. There's different values of each individual who's involved in the family or the farm. There's also different conflict styles. So people will go through these conflict modes later in the presentation, but people often default to 1 or 2 conflict modes. I know that I do. And as we go through them, hopefully you can kind of see which ones you go to automatically and kind of think about flexing those different muscles on the other conflict modes and styles. Sometimes we have misaligned goals. It could be, the incumbent wants to preserve the family assets no matter what, whereas maybe the sandwich or the successor generation, they might be interested in selling some of the assets. They might want to go a different way in terms of production. If it's a productive farm, they might want to produce something else. They might want to try some new technology. There's all kinds of different goals that we can have. A lot of times in succession, we fight because we don't communicate. We just don't talk to each other. It's too hard. We don't want to cause problems. And by avoiding and not talking, sometimes we cause more problems. But this lack of communication can be really difficult. Emotions can run very, very high. We're talking about something that matters to most people. And so, of course, we're going to have high emotions. This was mentioned as well. There's not always a fair and equal way to distribute the farmer property to the next generation, whether it's a very large property and business that we're talking about or small. And lastly, this ambiguity in the succession plan. So if we just don't know what's going to happen in terms of the timeline, who's going to control what will everyone receive? And those are really hard questions to ask. So we're gonna cover some of that today. And John also said incumbent individual's legacy. Yeah, that's right. Their own personal legacy oftentimes is tied up in this farm or property that they have. So one handout that we have for you is the FB-BRAG. It's a functioning assessment where there's basically just 4 questions. You can use this if you're working with a family. You can use this with your own family. I've had my family fill it out, and it's kind of funny. You basically are on the range from dysfunctional to functional. And honestly, most of the people who complete this are moderately dysfunctional or moderately functional if you're a glass half empty or half full type of person. But there's a lot of range, right? And what I encourage families to do if there is some conflict is to have everybody fill this out and kind of see what their scores are. It's often an indicator if we have some people who say their family's, dysfunctional, and then others say they're highly functional. The highly functional people just might not know of all the dysfunctional people's issues, right? They might not know that these people have these conflicts. They have all these emotions that they aren't able to communicate. They aren't able to talk things out. And so seeing where the scores are misaligned can kind of be telling sometimes. So this is a good resource. It's free. It's open out there. Roseanne also put it in chat for us to use. But this is a good just kind of tool to use to see where your family or where the families are that you're working with. So I wanted to share this along with this conflict and communication module. So this is some data that we collected from farmers in the North Central region in 2023. And this question we asked to those who inherited the business from a family member. So these are the individuals who did receive the farm or the farm business. We said, how successful was that transfer? They did get the farm. So remember that they weren't slighted. They weren't cut out. They received the farm. Thankfully, about 78% said the process was successful. The transfer was successful. But we had about 3% who said neither successful or unsuccessful, and about 20% who said unsuccessful. You'll notice this does add to 101 because of rounding errors. So I didn't miscalculate. It's just rounding errors. So when we asked them, how successful that transfer was, we went a step further and said, why? So why was the process or transfer unsuccessful? And the most cited reason that people said was, the process was not what they expected. That goes back to that ambiguity piece that we talked about earlier. If people don't know what to expect, they don't know who's going to control what, they don't know the timeline, it can cause a lot of issues in a family. And those who said, the process was successful, they said they felt certain and secure on the timeline for succession and also who was to be included. So knowing how, when, why things are going to transfer is very, very important to making sure that your family and business stay cohesive to the next generation. Whoops, too far. Okay, so when we think about, we're going back to that FB brag, but when we think about those families and or businesses that are highly functional, they're going to be the ones where people in the family and the business, they can turn to each other for help when something's troubling them. They feel that others accept and support their ideas or their thoughts. They're satisfied in the way that others in their family or business share time together. And they're also satisfied with the outcome when a decision has to be made in terms of, family first, business first, right? It's harvest time. Sister has a basketball game. Mom and dad need to be driving the grain cart and harvesting. What do we choose there? It's different, and there's not a wrong or a right answer. But we have to, this measures whether people are satisfied with the outcome of when those choices need to be made. So we need to have a balance between those things. So next, we're going to talk about the incumbent and the successor and their commitment to the process. This seems probably like a given that both individuals or both parties need to be committed to the process of succession, but it's not always easy to get there. So how do we define these? Becky covered this earlier. I'm just going to remind you, especially since it's the first module here. So the incumbent, that's the senior generation. They have the majority of ownership control, management likely. That sandwich generation is in between if we have 3 generations in the same business. And then the successor is the junior generation. They're the ones looking to take over. So when we think about the incumbent and successor, we really have to think about adapting roles and changing things over time. I'm an economist by trade, so I like to think about graphs. So you think about a successor, they start out low and they work their way up, whereas that incumbent is going to start at the top and work their way down. And we meet in the middle there in that X, right? One's going up, one's going down in terms of management and control. But we have to think about that incumbent and successor. They really have to think about changing their roles. It's really hard for them a lot of times to go from the employee to the boss, and also from the boss to maybe an advisor. But we have to think about changing those roles over time in order to be successful in this process. Ideally, the incumbent needs to be the one that initiates the transition process. They need to see that there's a need for new talent, the next generation. It's a lot easier for them to invite somebody in to the process versus the successor having to come to them and saying, can I be included? When can I take over? What can I manage? We really encourage that incumbent generation to be the one to initiate that process. It just goes a lot smoother when that happens that way. So obviously the goals of the successor and the incumbent might be different. Just logically, everybody's goals are different, right? A lot of times we see incumbents seek out successors who are a lot like them. I know that if I think about, the people I surround myself with, a lot of my friends, they have similar core values, right, and preferences as I do, right? It makes sense. We like to be around people a lot of times who are like us. But, what if that successor and incumbent, what if they don't have the same goals, right? Really, these two parties are mutually dependent. They need to really think about the other's concerns, about their goals, and try to work through those. It's really critical in succession that we make sure that, the incumbent and the successor are aware of each other's goals, fears, work through those understanding issues. We really need to make sure we're on the same page with those, even if we don't have the same goals. We need to know what each other wants in the process. I use this quote when I'm doing succession presentations a lot of times. It just says the continuity of a family business depends on the capacity of the family who owns the company to reach unity and commitment between its members. So that's what we're going to work through today, trying to use some different conflict modes so that we can find harmony and unity and commitment to the succession process to make sure we make it through to the other side. So when we think about successful families and successful businesses, there's some qualities and traits that are really essential there. Shared values is one. Obviously, it's a lot easier to get along with each other if we have shared values. Shared power. This is the one that we struggle with. I think sometimes in farms, it's hard for that incumbent generation to hand over the power to the next generation. Tradition can be really important. Passing on tradition and letting the successor and the sandwich generation know about the family traditions can be really important. A willingness to learn and grow from both sides of the table there is really, really important. Strong family ties, they sure make succession easier. And lastly, commitment to the process. We need to make sure that everyone involved is committed. And that brings us to types of commitment. So there's different commitment levels and types when it comes to the family land or the business. And each commitment type actually has consequences for how that party will behave. So we have 3 here that we're going to discuss. So the first is calculative commitment. And so for these individuals, the choice to join the business will benefit or pay off for them. So they're calculated, right? They think they ought to join the business because it will pay off. We have those that have effective commitment who, they really have a desire to join that business as a career. They really want to be there. A lot of times these successors, when we think about them, they grew up on the tractor, they love the land, they love spending time out there, they want to be there. And then we have normative commitment. And for whatever reason, these individuals feel an obligation to join the business. So they need to join the business, right? They feel like they owe that to their family, or, they feel for some reason like there's an obligation there for them to carry on. And we have to think about this because each of these different types of commitment will make these people act differently in terms of succession and how they communicate as well. So next, we're going to talk about conflict modes and how to use each one of them. We're going to talk about them in general and then give some examples as to how you would apply those in succession. So these are based off the TKI. It's the Thomas Kilmann instrument. And first off, I talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but what is conflict? And conflict really is any situation where your concerns or desires differ from those of another person. So at work, when we're going to go out for lunch and somebody says, where do you want to go out to lunch? And I say, oh, I was thinking Mexican. And they say, oh, I wanted to go to a burger joint. That's technically a conflict. We don't think about it as a conflict, but it is, right? Because your desires differ from those of another person. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we go about that. And Kurt is going to cover this at the end, but resolution is an outcome that we want to get to when we do have a conflict, but it's not a specific process. We can't tell you as educators, these are the steps you need to go to get to resolution. It's a condition where all the parties and their resources, they're put to rest after the conflict, and they really return to productivity and coordination. So that's what we're going to try to do here by using all of these different conflict modes. So when you think about what determines your conflict mode, it really depends on your skills that you have. So those different muscles that you build up, and then the situation that you're in. But all conflict handling modes have a spectrum of assertiveness and cooperativeness, and we're going to go through those now. So when we think about the 5 conflict modes, we have competing, collaborating, compromising, avoiding, and accommodating. So we're going to go through each of these. I think take just a minute here, just reading these words. If you could share in the chat what you think you are, just off top of your mind. If you read these, what do you think you are? Okay, collaborating, compromising, competing, accommodating, collaborating, accommodating. So interesting. I haven't really seen avoiding yet. All at different times. That's great. Yeah, you're already hitting on some of those things. Collaborating if others are willing. That's right. Collaborating and compromising. Okay, that's awesome. It's just interesting to kind of read what other people, what modes other people think they use the most. And then we'll talk a little bit more about each of these. So thank you for sharing, everybody. So first, we're going to talk about competing. Competing is very, very assertive and not very cooperative. So if we're using competing, we might think might makes right, right? We can use this for a number of situations. If we need to take quick action, maybe we have to make an unpopular decision. We can use competing to stand up for vital issues or to protect ourselves. On the other side of that, if we overuse competing, we might be surrounded by yes people or yes men. So if you're an over competitor, if you notice people always saying yes to you, that might give you the cue, oh, maybe I'm competing a little bit too much. So it might be something to just think about. So when can we really use this style? We can use it if a quick decisive decision is vital, for an example, in an emergency. So if something breaks or somebody is pinned or something happens, we don't really have time to say, well, I think we should probably do this. And then somebody else says, well, we should do this. Somebody can be competitive in that situation and come in and say, okay, you do this. I'm going to call 911. You do this, and make some action happen. Another time we might need to use the competing style is when there's unpopular courses of action, but we need to take that anyway. So if we have to cut costs, nobody wants to do that, right? It's not fun. Sometimes we have to discipline employees or colleagues. Maybe we have to enforce an unpopular rule, right? It can be hard, but you can use that competitive conflict mode to do that. Also, you can use it if there's an issue that's vital to your company welfare and you know that you're right. So it's not fun, but you know you're making the right decision. You need to protect yourself from other people who take advantage of non-competitive behavior. So you could use this competing style. So maybe you're one of those people who's less assertive and you really need to use that competing style to stand up for something. When we think about its use in succession, you can use the competing style to stand up for non-negotiables, and this goes for each generation. When you're talking about succession planning and you're trying to come up with a plan, like I said before, each generation might have different goals, but if there's something that you're really not willing to compromise on, you can use your competing style to make sure that you're heard. So that goes to the second point, just to make sure that your voice is heard in the planning process. You can use that competing style and flex that muscle. Next, we're going to talk about collaborating. So collaborating, I saw a lot of people say that this is their mode. So this is high on assertiveness and high on cooperativeness. So it's really integrating solutions. We're working with other people. We're brainstorming. So two heads are better than one could be something that we use here. You can use collaborating to really merge insights, gain commitment, and also to improve relationships. So in general, you want to use this collaborating style when you're looking for some kind of integrative solution. When the concerns of both parties are too important to be compromised. So this would be useful. You can probably think in succession, right? But we want to integrate those different perspectives, come to a decision that everybody can agree on. You can also use the collaborating style when you need to work through some hard feelings that have been affecting a relationship. You can use that collaborating style to try to get insight from other people and to gain some commitment. This style does take a lot of time, and so we don't want to use it too much, but at the same really, really useful, like I said, in succession. So when we think about the collaborating style in succession, this is a style that we really want to use. It does take a lot more time, but it's a very important topic and it's very useful in succession. So we really want to make sure that we're using this to hear everybody's perspective, to come up with an integrative solution that everybody can buy into, and to also maintain the family relationships in the farm or forest or property, whatever we're talking about there. Next, we have compromising. So this is in the middle of assertiveness and cooperativeness. So we might say, okay, let's split the difference, right? We're giving up some and the other person's giving up some too. We can use compromising when the issue is moderately important. So we both care about something that's going on, but we're also willing to give a little bit. So we can also use this when we're trying to reach resolution and, of two parties that have equal power and strong commitment. Compromising can be used as a placeholder to create just a temporary solution. Say, okay, let's meet in the middle on this. We can revisit and collaborate later to come up with a different solution, perhaps. If you have time constraints, you can use compromising instead of collaborating. And it can be, like I said before, a backup style, right? To collaborating or competing. We're going to split the difference, move on to the next topic, right? So you can use this when, like I said, the goals are moderately important, but it's not really worth the disruption to use competing or collaborating styles. You can use it just to get a quick decision and use it as a backup mode if needed. So when we think about using compromising in succession, we want to be really cautious using this too much. We don't want to avoid issues that are important to both parties. Resentment can quickly ensue if we use compromising too much or if you give up too much in the succession process. And that's for either generation, right? If the incumbent generation feels like they've compromised too much and they've really let the successor do something completely different than what they're comfortable with, they're going to have resentment. On the flip side, if the successor compromises, and doesn't feel like their voice is heard, they're going to have resentment. So we need to be careful with this in succession. Next, we have the avoiding style, and this is very low on assertiveness and cooperativeness. In avoiding, we just leave well enough alone, right? We just leave it there. We don't want to dive into it. We don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers. Unfortunately, I would say that the avoiding style is the one that I see a lot in family and farm succession. We want to avoid issues. We don't want to talk about death. We don't want to talk about handing over management or ownership. And so a lot of times we avoid the issues. But that's really not what we want to do. So a good time to use the avoiding style in general is if an issue is unimportant to you. So if somebody really wants to go out a certain place for dinner, for example, and you really don't care, you can let them decide, right? If you're like, I can eat whatever, right? It's not important. You're just going to avoid that conflict. You can also use the avoiding style if you don't think you're going to win. So if you go into a situation in a conflict and the other person is set in their ways, they're not going to give anything, and it really wouldn't help anything for you to fight, sometimes we just avoid the conflict, right? I mean, we can all probably think of a time when we've done this, even though most of us didn't put this as our primary conflict mode. I think we can all think of a time where we've just avoided an issue and we said, okay, they can win that one. A lot of times, maybe the potential costs of confronting that conflict is not going to pay off in terms of getting to a resolution, right? You can avoid conflict when you need to let people cool down. Maybe they're too heated and we need to take a step back. There's one of my kids' coaches actually put this rule in place, which I thought was really interesting, and we could use it in other aspects of our lives, I think. He said, in basketball, if there's a game and as a parent you're heated, you're upset and you want to come talk to me, give it 24 hours before you come rip my head off, right? So give yourself some time to cool off before you confront me about something and we can have an adult conversation. But I thought that was interesting. It's the first time I'd really heard it, but you can really avoid a conflict sometimes if you need to let that other person cool down, maybe take a step back and give them some time. You can avoid a conflict when you need to gather more information instead of making an immediate decision. I know that I've done this. And I think it's hereditary because my dad does this too. Even when I was little, I would say, can I go over to so and so's house? And he said, let me think about it. And I thought, well, geez, what is there to think about, right? Yes or no? But really, he was just trying to think through, what are our next steps for the weekend? What are we doing? And does it make sense, right? So you can kind of, postpone that decision. You can avoid the conflict if others can resolve the issue more effectively. And sometimes when an issue seems symptomatic of another more basic issue. So I don't know. Do any of you get hangry when you're hungry? You get angry. I know I do. I can get snappy sometimes when mama needs to eat. So I might be snappy, and really I'm going off about the house being a mess or some wrappers left out. Really, what I'm yelling about is symptomatic of the more basic issues that I need to eat, right? You can think about this in different ways, but we need to, a lot of times we can avoid that type of conflict. So when we think about the avoiding style in succession, we really want to be cautious when we use this. Succession, again, is really too important to avoid. If you avoid the issues that are important to both parties, again, that resentment will ensue, and that's not our goal here. And lastly, we have accommodating. So this is very cooperative and low on assertiveness. So a saying here would be, it would be my pleasure, right? You're going to accommodate that other person. So when should we use accommodating? Sometimes we accommodate when we realize that we're wrong. So if you're in a heated argument with your colleague about, some issue on a document or some issue in general, if all of a sudden you look at it again and you say, you know what, I was wrong on this one, you can accommodate and say, okay, yes, you have this one, right? You're going to give that to the other person. You can also use it when an issue is more important to the other person than yourself. You can accommodate and let them win that battle. Another time you can accommodate is when you want to build up social credits for later, for issues that are more important to you. You can say, okay, that is more important to you. I'm going to let you win that one, but later I'm going to bring it up because I want to win this part, right? So that's accommodating. You can use that at work and at home. Sometimes you can be outmatched in conflict and you're losing. And if you were more competitive, it would really only damage your cause. So you can accommodate. Sometimes we accommodate just to preserve harmony and to avoid disruption. It's not always the best style to use in every situation, but if you're trying to just preserve the harmony, you can try to accommodate. Another thing, and I use this with my students sometimes, when you want to help them learn from their own mistakes. If you have a discussion, you're going to use this method to collect data, and all of a sudden your student says, you know what, I want to use this method, and I think it would be better. Sometimes you can let them try it out and accommodate them, and then they can learn from that process, right? Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but you can do that by using accommodating. So in succession, you can use the accommodating style if there's some issues or topics that are unimportant to you. If you're going through certain assets, a lot of times there's one asset that certain people want more than others. And so sometimes you can say, I'm going to accommodate. I don't, you can have that one, and I'm going to build up social credits for later, right? But what we really want to avoid is accommodating when issues are important to both. Again, we'll have that resentment after decisions have been made, and we really want to not do that. So in general, each of us can use all these 5 conflict handling modes. Each has its place. It just depends on your skill set and the situation. And your conflict mode behavior in your family and your business is really a result of your personal predisposition. So when I first asked, what is your default conflict mode, do you think? But it also depends on the requirements of the situation where you find yourself. And you can also have different modes for your business and for your family. So you might have to act a certain way, at work, but you might act a different way at home. It's all about the different dynamics that you surround yourself with. But I really, really encourage each of you, if there's a mode that you think, you know what, I really don't use that at all, start thinking about ways that you can. Practice makes perfect. So the more we use these modes, the more comfortable we'll be, and we'll be a more effective conflict manager, and get maybe more what we want out of conflict. So I think with that, I'm handing it over to Kurt.
Oh, okay. Let's see if I can get control of everything. I think I can. So there it is. I guess I have control. So, yes, I'm Kurt Smith. I'm an assistant professor of forestry at NC State. So obviously I didn't write this example that's coming up because it's about hog farming. Most of my scenarios involve trees and forest succession and things like that. But anyway, and I do like your examples, Renee, of dealing with lunch and dinner. Although I will say those are not trifling subjects to me. Those are serious things. So good examples all the way around. And of course, I think the broad point maybe Renee's trying to make, and you can chime in and tell me if I'm wrong, is a lot of this is sort of aimed at trying to get you to sort of look inside of yourself and understand how you operate, and also to understand how other people operate so that you can sort of adjust to each other and come out at the other end with some sort of resolution or positive direction moving forward. So that's why some of these soft skills, some people may be looking at them and kind of scratching their head, depends on your personality. But they're really very valuable. In fact, I'd even say that folks that are sort of turned off by the soft skills are probably the ones that need it the most. So this is good stuff. I've enjoyed it. I always learn something, even going through these modules. So in this particular example, you just have what I think is really common. You can read it while I'm talking. You have a single sibling. Mom and dad are just assuming that their daughter's going to take over the business. They make this assumption. No conversation going on for 10, 15 years. And then, over those 15 years, the daughter suddenly, I'm interested in computer science, and suddenly I've got an offer for a six-figure job. I never really liked farming that much anyway, or running a family forest. And so all of a sudden, everybody is sort of either at odds or disappointed in each other or scrambling to find some path forward. And so this is something you want to avoid. When I work a lot with, I already mentioned landowners with forestry, and I work with a fair amount of heirs property owners. So those are people that die intestate without wills. And one of the biggest, sort of speaking to surveys, one of the biggest hurdles that they have is that they want to avoid family conflict at all costs. And that's why a lot of landowners, 60 and 70, they just will even just let it go in hopes that other people will work it out later. So avoiding family conflict is usually one of the great big things. I'd even be curious to know if, from Renee, if there's a percentage on those different style types. I'm guessing conflict avoiders as a percentage could be higher. I'm sure somebody has studied that. But at any rate, what could have been done to avoid this issue altogether? And I think the answer is intuitive, I think, probably obvious to a lot of you, and that's sort of continuous conversation. I practice this with my students. When they come to the end of the year, they're not surprised whether they got an A, B, C, or D in my class. That's because they've had continuous feedback from me verbally, through quizzes, through homework assignments, and the like. It's really no different in succession. So this idea of communicating and trying to align your goals, goal alignment. So that's the other part, is just having an assumption that your daughter or son will take over the business, wants to take over the business, probably isn't all that sound necessarily. You may even have to adjust your goal as a parent, or bring in another person or a friend or another sibling that's suddenly become interested in the property. So, or you may have to shift your goals altogether. So the key, really, see if I can get this thing to advance for me, is communication. I think that's obvious, but I could even add to that continuous communication, so that people understand roles and responsibilities, not once a year, not, once every 5 years, but pretty continuously, talking over the dinner table, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a great way to avoid conflict, whether you're passing on the family farm or forest, or, trying to meet the expectation of students in the classroom. So, and the other part of this too, I'm going to glide through these slides and then I think we'll open it up to questions, I believe, is a realization that resolution may not always occur, but you should always have an attitude of resolution as you move forward with these things. So the key here again, communication is always required. And I would add to that continuous communication. And with that, a realization that succession will take time to accomplish and that you may need outside help. So in the case of a lot of folks I work with, I know in North Carolina, where I'm from, Bob Hulbert runs a mediation center, outside help. Sometimes it's a pastor in the community or a close family friend, but outside help can be very important. And then finally, commitment to the process. You really want to take this somewhere and see your legacy go forward.